Hi, everybody. Just going to give it a couple seconds to let people filter in, and then we'll get started with the presentation for today. Alrighty, I see that number jumping up, so let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the live webinar, Data, the New Oil When Refined with RETScreen is the Refinery. I'm Alex Retsky, Digital Coordinator for Annex Business Media and Energy Manager Canada, as well as your moderator for this session. And before we get started here, I just wanted to extend a big thank you to our sponsor, RETScreen, for putting on this webinar. Before I pass it over to our speaker this morning, I'd like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items. Firstly, this webinar is being recorded, so for any reason you have to leave early or you miss part of the presentation, a link to the recording will be emailed to all registrants in 24 hours. Secondly, the audience is in listen-only mode, so cameras and microphones will be turned off for you. However, questions can and should be submitted to the Q&A folder at the bottom right of your screen, and questions will be saved for today's presentation. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. First, we have Scott Rouse, who will be here today to give us a background on some of the data he has seen surrounding this topic, and he'll be kicking things off for us today. Next, we have Stephen Dixon, who will be here to give us a utility perspective on the side of RETScreen, and we will learn how tools like RETScreen can reveal energy profiles. Next, we have Michel Perrin, giving us the customer's perspective in order to gain a deeper understanding of your plant or facility's performance and the reasons behind it. And finally, we have Amir Kameloui. He is here to give us a service provider perspective. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alex. Good morning, everybody. I, for one, am excited to be here. I think this is an exciting topic, and we're going to be seeing a whole new beginning. So with that, I'm going to get started. So data, we're calling it the new oil because by understanding the data, it opens up the window to understand so much more. We've got a very packed workshop today. So I'm going to go through the introduction relatively quickly so I give more time to Stephen, Michelle, and Amir. But I do want to echo Alex's comment about RETScreen. RETScreen has helped the energy industry quite a bit. We use RETScreen probably every day. And the clarity that RETScreen has provided, the convenience, the consistency of methodology, all of these has made it a real benefit for the work that we do. And just talking about no energy, TechnoSim, and energy at work, we all work together because we believe that by working together, looking at solutions that are sustainable, we're going to lead to better results. And better results to us are not just economic, they're also environmental, greenhouse gas reductions, etc. We really believe that the data can help us move forward, and we need tools like RETScreen. I'll explain why. So the traditional approach when we look at the relationship between the utility, the customer, the service provider has really been around the meter. The utility is responsible for safe supply of electricity up to and including the meter. The customer is considered behind the meter activities. The one exception might be when the customer makes arrangement to get a pulse output. And the pulse output allows the customer to get the same data that the utility uses to bill. And that's a very powerful tool. We put real-time monitoring on a lot of our meters, whether electricity, gas, steam, chilled water. It's just having that data makes it very helpful to understand what's actually taking place. And that's really the role of the service providers, to provide that advice, looking at efficiency opportunities, etc. What we're thinking is that there's this new partnership, and we're starting to see it happen already, where utilities are now working with the customers to better identify this win-win-win opportunity in energy efficiency, storage, renewable options. I think we're seeing a whole platform of new opportunities. And of course, the service provider is there because they've got a lot of the tools. And again, we need that data to best understand. And the expression I like to use is we want to listen, but we want to listen with our eyes. We have to let the data tell us what's happening. So when we look at Matrix, happened to be one of my favorite movies, and when I look at all the data going down the screen, I can't see anything. I never see the woman in the red dress. But when you can take that data and you refine it through a tool like or a software like RETScreen, all of a sudden it starts to tell you this particular graph on the right is a steam profile of QSUM. Amir is going to be talking a little bit more about it. We have a very stable baseline, R squared better than 0.8, which is great. We can see when the steam usage increases, decreases. In this case, we saw a slight increase in the summer and then a dramatic increase in the winter. That spurred action. And we're now working with the operations team to find out what is actually taking place. So when we talk about data, what is good data? This particular file we received, it was steam data. It had over 45,000 rows, 5 columns, over 200,000 data points. Sounds pretty ominous to get all that data, but really the data file was perfect. The utility provided an explanation of what the data was. Everything was tab delineated. Missing data was identified, which is a key thing when we get data. We don't want to see data that's interpolated, extrapolated, or missing without an explanation. And the good thing was the data was provided in an Excel file in this case, or CSV. But the important thing is to have good data that you can use, and then having that, you can import it into whatever tool you're using. In our case, it was RETScreen. But what we want to avoid is this black box approach, where things are happening behind the scenes. We don't know what is happening, especially for third-party verification. So I want to give you a specific example. We were working with Toronto Hydro. You can see their customers on the left-hand side. We're the service provider, and we're working with the utility. We developed our energy management action plan. We developed our measurement and verification plan, which Toronto Hydro reviewed and approved. And through RETScreen, we were able to do our analytics, create visibility, and also enable the verification, which Toronto Hydro was then be able to take the raw data as well as our plans, and they were able to verify the data. What was particularly important with this particular story is that they were able to verify data in 2020, which is when obviously we had a drastic reduction in occupancy, but we knew the energy efficiency was there as well. And thanks to Amir, we were able to separate what was an energy efficiency reduction versus an occupancy reduction. The result was Toronto Hydro was able to verify over 17 million kilowatt hours. The economic benefit was over $3.2 million. And that was between 2017 and 2020. So what did we learn? After looking at 28 submissions working over a 4-year period, it involves well over 100 people with all the various customers and operating teams and management teams. It really came down to us, the 3 Ps. People. People drive change. If you don't engage them, how do you engage them? It's by ensuring that the right person has the right information at the right time. And everybody has a different need for that right information. Obviously, you need a process in place. And in our case, it was the EMAP, it's a proven framework, and we were able to make sure that the right person had the right information, et cetera. And then, of course, you need products. You need our toolbox. The utility management toolbox has a lot of different tools in it, but RETScreen is the one that is really a foundation for a lot of things we're doing, and that's what we want to share with you today. So we believe that there's a new challenge available, and it requires new approaches, a new relationship with the utility. We want to bring that, mix it with a customer, having service providers offer their insights and experience. And of course, the linchpin here is data. Without data, we're limited. So from a utility perspective, how they can use RETScreen is resource allocation, demand side management, compliance, stakeholder expectations. We're starting to see a lot more of that, where there's a partnership between the utility and the utility owner. They want to see, let's say a municipality wants to see their utility participate in meeting their objectives, particularly around greenhouse gas, carbon reduction, et cetera. Obviously, the customer wants to benefit. They can benefit through the energy savings. Greenhouse gas reduction, again, has become a major impact to a lot of the objectives that customers have. And then very important is when they do a project, they want to be able to demonstrate that project has delivered what they were expecting to deliver, so they can make the next investment. And then, of course, the service providers, we're looking to benefit through market analysis. We want to be able to develop more projects and the feasibility of those projects, and overall enhance our what we can offer. So RETScreen, it is our choice of the tool that we use. As I mentioned, we probably use it every day. It offers a comprehensive suite of tools that you can use within RETScreen, and Stephen and Michelle are going to talk more about that. So I want to show you a couple of quick examples. We're going to be talking about IP-MVP, how RETScreen helps measurement and verification. QSUM, you're going to hear an awful lot about that and how effective it is. But just a very quick example, Stephen's going to give you a lot more. This was a project that we're doing where we're following QSUM. It happens to be natural gas. We noticed a sharp increase. And when we talked to the operations team, they could not explain why the gas went up. And because it was in October and we looked at the weather, we weather corrected, et cetera, something didn't look right. Make a long story short, we were able to talk to the utility. We used the QSUM to show what was happening. We went back into the system and we found that there was a billing hiccup. And we were able to make a correction to the QSUM. Once we did that, we found there was a $17,000 correction on the bill. And more importantly, the greenhouse gas was able to be corrected as well. So that's just one small example. Stephen and Michelle have a lot more. Amir is going to be talking about the importance of measurement and verification. But I want to turn it over to Stephen. And Stephen, I'm looking forward to hearing. I always enjoy your examples. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott. Appreciate that. So, yeah, you had one of my little quotes in there too about every building needing a QSUM, right? So that's one of my favorite ones. Like I truly believe that. So as I'm just waiting here for my screen or things to get ready here, I'm going to just make sure we're all good here. So see here. There we go. And RETScreen loaded up. All right, folks. So good morning. I've got some great examples to share with you. I'm excited to also see what Michelle and Amir are going to show you too. My job this morning really is twofold. I mean, Scott, you described it as the utility perspective, and I will do that, but I'm actually going to do a little startup right now. Hang on a second. A little startup around what RETScreen is, where it came from, right? Pretty quick. Many of you probably know that who are online. I know we got a few people that I do recognize the names of. But RETScreen is a tool that's used the world over. It is I'm very proud, and I know Greg Lang is online. He's the creator of RETScreen. Very proud that this is a Canadian tool that's used the world over. And as Scott said, I use it every day. I've used it every day probably for the last 20 years in one form or another. So it's a very powerful tool. And it's an all-in-one tool. RETScreen has been supported, development have been supported by many, many different parties, including here in Ontario, the ISO, obviously Natural Resources Canada, and other international partners too. I was honored with an award from NASA a few years ago with respect to how I use RETScreen and the real-time data that comes in from their satellite database. So lots of people and lots of organizations. I'm just one of a few people, and Michelle is too, that have contributed to the development of RETScreen. There's literally hundreds of people like ourselves, Scott included, who've contributed to development in bits and pieces of RETScreen. So it's not just, a couple of people in a room developing people software. This is actually, it comes from the user community. It comes from the energy practitioners community. So that's why I think it's so practical in so many ways. Now, Kevin Burke over at RETScreen will often say, even he doesn't know all the different things in RETScreen because so many people don't. And I'll tell you the same thing. There's parts of RETScreen that I'm not very familiar with too, right? I've looked at them, but I'm an expert in them? No, that's where we have to turn the job over to the person that is. So it's a very powerful tool. I'll talk about a few things this morning, which basically the 4 or 5 functions of RETScreen. The one, if you've never used RETScreen before, I'm going to mention right now, you will receive a 30-day license after this session to RETScreen, which means you get to kick the tires, play with it a little bit. The one thing I'm going to suggest you do at the very least, is have a look at the Virtual Energy Analyzer. It's a great tool for looking at different ways you can use RETScreen to do what we call analysis. It's also the basis for a net zero planning tool, which I'll just touch on very quickly as we go through the introduction here this morning. So the Virtual Energy Analyzer allows you to jump in and look at a building or a measure, all pre-built. It's it's like this big library of projects, ideas, and how you could use RETScreen. You could take those and modify them for your purposes, or maybe you set them up, say, okay, that's the way somebody's done it, I'm going to build my one. But one way or the other, it's a way to get your toe into the water and then ease yourself into that, immerse yourself into the RETScreen experience. Benchmarking, absolutely, right? Knowing where we are, where we want to end up, being able to measure those energy intensities. RETScreen has some great tools for benchmarking both energy cost and carbon. And believe it or not, carbon and energy efficiency are two completely different things. If you haven't thought about that one before, go have a look at it, because they are. You can be very energy efficient, but not carbon efficient. You can be very carbon efficient, but maybe and cost efficient, but not energy efficient. So they are different. There are different efficiencies there. Feasibility. What if I do this, change it to that, right? And what are my energy, my costs, my emissions, and what's the financial result, right? And if for a big enough project, what's the risk, right? Can I analyze the variation in the outcome that I might be expecting and try to minimize that risk? Performance analysis. This is one that Scott has focused a lot on. I will finish my session focusing on this one. This is one that I've contributed significantly to in RETScreen. It is a very powerful tool, and I truly believe every facility needs a QSUM. What I mean by that is they need to be able to track the energy performance on an ongoing basis. What's your energy trajectory? Performance analysis in RETScreen is probably the preeminent, it kind of sounds like I'm bragging here, but the preeminent tool for doing this kind of thing. There aren't many tools out there the world over that can do what RETScreen does in performance analysis. And even though it's a complex part of RETScreen, it's a lot simpler than it would be in many other statistical tools. So it's a great tool for that purpose. And then portfolio analysis, where we bring it all together. From a utilities perspective, you can have a portfolio of your customers you're working with. From a consultant's perspective, a portfolio of your customers you're working with. And from the customer perspective, the portfolio of your buildings. There's many different ways to use the portfolio analysis, not the least of which is in the net zero planning tool. And I'll highlight that one and point you to a video that Kevin Burke did a little while ago, which is really, really interesting. All right, project types, anything you can think of. Now, you won't necessarily find, like, for example, I always ask people, like, how do you model a destratification fan in RETScreen? Well, you can go through and try to find a destratification fan project. You might find it. But RETScreen, you can basically model anything as long as you understand the energy system. Actually, Michelle will show us how, even though RETScreen wasn't originally designed to model, say, heat recovery in a particular situation where it only happens at very low outside temperatures, you can use RETScreen to do that quite effectively. Okay, so as a user of RETScreen, you have to understand your tool and know how to use the tool properly. But once you understand that, the sky's the limit on what you can do with it. Right? There's lots of contained data, what we call them databases, product databases. So if I'm going through and doing a photovoltaic system and I want to say, okay, I'm going to, let's just cost this thing out so I can pull the product, pull some costs for that product, pull the weather and the climate data to figure out how much sunshine I've got, and bingo, I've got a pretty powerful assessment of that particular project. So using the interfaces that are there, we can get access to a lot of things that we might have to go to different sources for if we were doing that in a spreadsheet. I did a webinar, actually a couple of days of training a little while ago with a consultant up in the Ottawa area. They have all these spreadsheets they were using. After the 2 days, they were throwing their spreadsheets away when they realized what they could do with RETScreen. And we actually put RETScreen head to head with their spreadsheets, and it actually came out really well. They were actually quite surprised, and we in fact found problems with their spreadsheets by comparing it to RETScreen. So, very capable tool, all-in-one tool. Now, because Michelle's going to jump into it, I probably won't dive down and do it. But the thing I want to highlight to you on this screen here is a Virtual Energy Analyzer. As a starting point, when you open it up, there's this interface that talks about all the different functions you can do. But the top of that second column is the Virtual Energy Analyzer. That's the thing that allows you to see how you can use RETScreen to really do what-if analysis. Now, to get into performance analysis, you might have to look at a few case studies, templates, and things like that, and I'll show you where those are as well. But RETScreen has a lot of tools to allow you to teach yourself how to use it as well. So there's learning resources. I like to refer to the case studies and templates. So on the main screen, you can go down here in the bottom of that second column, case studies and templates. And then what you see then is hundreds of literally either case studies, which are real projects that are analyzed with RETScreen, or a template right? Which is basically a hypothetical project to show you how to use a particular function. So you can click into the actual template. In this case, you can see the situation. And then if you double click in, you actually get to see the solution, self-teaching tool. So you can go through there, find a project, try it for yourself, see what the answer looks like. So basically, there's a lot of resources to get you started in it. There's a lot of help. I love the help. Not, maybe because I'm kind of featured in some of the video help, maybe that's a reason. No, I actually do like the video help, right? So like you can click on text on a field in RETScreen and you get the little standard text you get out of a lot of software. But unlike a lot of other software, if you click on this e-learning button up here, you get a link to RETScreen's YouTube channel where you can see a little video, and this one I think is a 3-minute video on how to do pump analysis in RETScreen, and you get to hear yours truly on that. A lot of other people on there as well, but so, and what's interesting is you can pause the video, try something, play it a bit more, and so you can follow me through doing that. So that's in line, in RETScreen, in context, really powerful tools, right? Now, the virtual energy analyzer, what does it offer us? Well, it offers us the ability to look at a completely built facility, right? And the word archetype is what we use to describe these things. These are archetypical buildings or archetypical measures or projects. What's an archetype? Well, if you look it up, the definition is something that's very typical. So what RETScreen has done is work with people like myself and Michelle and many others to build these archetypical buildings. And they've built both ones that are energy efficient and ones that are carbon efficient as well. I'll detail that a little bit more. So you can look at it from the whole building perspective, or you can look at it from a particular measure. I want to go in there and look at a measure on heat recovery, on a ventilation system. So boom, you can actually bring up that particular project. So either a whole building or a thin slice through a building with a particular measure. And there's literally hundreds of measures that you can look at, hundreds of building types that are in there. So I just pulled a couple of examples here. So on the left-hand side, we have a community center, right? So a building in a municipality, right? And the archetype was built around a 40% energy reduction. Here we see, right, the screen we call the include screen, right? Access from the toolbar up here. And we see basically the systems in the building. And in fact, all the measures that are in play, because this screen shows the fuel saved. And we can go through here and we can take a look at all the different measures that have been built into this. And we can turn them on and off too and build a basket of measures that have an outcome, meaning a financial result and a carbon result that meet our criteria. On the right-hand side, here we see the deep carbon archetypes, right? An 80 to 90% carbon reduction. And in fact, by turning on renewables on-site and off-site, you can in fact take that building now to 100% carbon reduction as well. Right, in this example, they're showing it to 90%. But there are measures that are left to your discretion that you can turn on, which will eliminate all of that carbon completely. It's up to you whether you want to spend that money now or down the road, maybe taking a building to net zero ready, which is kind of what this one is, and then eventually to net zero when the time comes when it becomes economically or financially viable for you to do that, right? So archetypes are really good ways to jump in and really see the way RETScreen works and what you can do with it. You can, if you've got a municipal building, if you've got a school, if you've got an office, you can pull one up for all those different types of facilities and then really just use that as an example of how to build your building. Now, I mentioned this earlier, the deep carbon reduction archetypes, the ones on the right-hand side, are used then as the basis for a net zero planning tool in RETScreen. This is actually part of the portfolio tool because what you can do is you can build a portfolio of buildings of various different types that you might have, along with all their details, and then you can specify some criteria, some measures, some actions to take upon those buildings, what your baseline is going to be, how much rooftop or ground mounted solar you want, how much gas you want to leave behind, maybe 0, or in this case, 30%, right? And then financial analysis, prices to place upon the utilities that you're purchasing. And what it will do is it will build you a portfolio of buildings, right, which represent your buildings in basically a low carbon state. And it will allow you then to document, what are the different actions. It's called a waterfall diagram, and it shows all the different actions. Now, interestingly enough, if you look closely at my example here, these are in Edmonton, Alberta, right? So why is that consequential? Well, because one of the things on here is cleaner electricity grid. So that's one of the things that you can build in here. Now, does that work in Ontario? Probably not, because we've got a relatively clean clean electricity grid compared to a province like Alberta, right? But look at this one, energy efficiency measures. Well, that sends me a strong message. If I'm going to get to low carbon, I've got to focus on efficiency, not just putting renewables on and maybe changing the heat pumps. I need to improve the efficiency of my building. So RETScreen we can use RETScreen to do that. We can use RETScreen to really understand what are the things we have to focus on. Michelle and I do a lot of energy hunts, and we've seen energy hunts recently where without capital investment, just through operational optimization and getting smart about the way we operate that building, we've seen 20 to 30% carbon reduction, not to mention the cost and the energy reduction, but the carbon piece, we can take a big chunk out of carbon through operational improvement, EBCX, things like that. So, you know, I think that RETScreen does a really good job of revealing why that's so. A lot of people see this goal of low carbon as being this monolithic thing that I got to crack that nut. Well, if you open it up and look inside with RETScreen, you can really see all the detail. You can see the things that you can do today, tomorrow, the next day, and eventually out to that target, whichever year it might be. And RETScreen actually allows you to set your target when you're doing your net zero plan. When do I want to get to essentially net zero or whatever my target is? So great tools for planning. If you want to have a look at how to use that tool, nice 90-minute video with Kevin Burke on that link at the top of the screen there. And these slides are going to be sent out afterwards, I believe. So that's kind of my introductory piece. I want to go through a few examples in feasibility, and then I want to jump into my passion, which, well, if this isn't already my passion, even more so when I get into the performance analysis piece. But feasibility is pretty good too, right? So you can do some pretty basic things like lighting. But the neat thing about lighting when you go in there is that you actually get to pull products out of the database. So rather than guessing about what that characteristic of that device you have is, you can go into the product database, which is the one with the little shopping bag here, and you can pull the product characteristics out. And when you get down here to what's going to cost to do this analysis, so we're still seeing lighting retrofits. Obviously, they're still out there. You go into the cost database, and now you know the cost. So you can continue to do those lighting retrofits moving forward. And there's actually even a tool in here to allow you to make sure you improve or maintain illumination, not make it worse, which is one of the consequences of a poor lighting retrofit. When it comes to the HVAC side of it, RETScreen has a pretty reasonable, I mean, it's a full ventilation model. It allows you to look at, you know, the airflow, but all the different permutations of things you can do to influence the airflow and the temperature. So actually, Michelle, you're going to talk about doing heat recovery on a ventilation system, I think, later, right? So you'll talk to us about how we use RETScreen to do that. So we not only have to model the way it is today, we have to model the way we want it to be, and we have to recognize the conditions that exist in the building as well. So Michelle will get.
Yeah, I also want to mention, Stephen, that in our treasure hunt, RETScreen is probably the primary tool that we use to very quickly provide the feedback to the people. Say, this measure provides so much savings, and we know we can trust it. It's a proven tool. So it's something we used, like Scott said, we use that, I won't say daily, but almost daily.
Yeah, it's like I use the ventilation tool a lot when we come into a building where their makeup air unit, right, in the mechanical ventilator or a penthouse is operating outside of the schedule it needs to operate. So I can simply adjust the schedule, drop the time, and show very quickly what those savings in both heat and electricity are going to be, right? So I can show both sides of the house. This is an example.
Sorry, Stephen. If I can jump in as well. When I talked about that over 100 people that we work with and getting the right information to the right person at the right time, you know, being able to talk to an operations manager, an operations supervisor, and give them hard numbers, that just builds the case so much stronger. And the turnaround time, instead of taking the next week, you know, you do it in the treasure hunt, which I think is so powerful.
Well, I always say that, you know, working with a group of operational people in a building, the operators, to find ideas to save energy is great. But when we can put numbers to their ideas, that's amazing, because their ideas become seen as the value that they are, right? Putting numbers is important. That's where we use RETScreen. Here's an example. I was doing a workshop a little while ago, not specifically on RETScreen, but this was in the early days, and I said, you know, you could use RETScreen to evaluate a lot of different things. And there was a guy in the back of the room, like, clear, I'm looking for my cell phone here. So he has, you know, he's on his cell phone, and I'm talking away in the front, and he goes, Steve, hang on a second, I got a question. I said, sure, what's the question, Mac? He said, well, like, my insulation contractor, I'm a roofing contractor, is putting a roof on a new roof on our extension of our long-term care home, and he wants to know whether I want to should not go to R10, but go to R20. He says, we can accommodate R20 in the roof with the structure and everything, right? And there's a lot of issues, but he says, we can deal with it. So he said, do you think I should do it? Do you think your fancy tool called RETScreen could help me to answer that question? I said, sure, it can, right? So I actually literally asked them, okay, how do you heat your building? What temperatures do you use? What's your boiler efficiency? What's your efficiency of your air conditioning system? You're going to go from R10 to R20. What's the roof area? Let's do the calc. Oh, by the way, what's the cost of your price for your energy, your electricity, natural gas? Got that in there. Your building is in southwestern Ontario. Okay, let's do it. So I literally did it right then there in the session. Took me about 5-10 minutes. Used the envelope model, did a thin slice into the envelope model, modeled the roof, right? Put in all the requisite parameters. I was actually able to show the carbon reduction. But the neat thing is, came up and it said 8.6 years, right? Because the contractor was quoting $1.20 a square foot. I said, Mac, why don't you offer him 80 cents a square foot? And he calls the guy up. I said, I bet you he's got the insulation in the truck already. He's just waiting for you to say yes. He says, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And he went for the 80 cents. So he took the payback from 8.6 years, I think, down to about, 6 years, right? So that's worth doing, right? To answer the question, that roof light, even at the $1.20 a square foot, it would probably be worth doing, but definitely at the 80 cents a square foot. So answering, RETScreen, one of its positionings is basically a decision support tool. There's a decision that was supported by RETScreen quite clearly. All right. The other thing, a lot of questions come up today around heat pumps, right? Does it make sense to put a heat pump in, an air source, a water source heat pump? RETScreen has the tons of tools to do that. Now, the RETScreen has two ways to do this, which is kind of interesting. One way many people probably are aware of who've used RETScreen, and that is you simply change the heating equipment from gas to, say, a heat pump, and the gas has an efficiency of 75%, the heat pump has an efficiency of 159%. In the newest version of RETScreen, you can actually distribute your load between your conventional or your heat pump system and your conventional system, so you can model a hybrid system in this case, right? So that's what we call an energy model. But RETScreen also has, really interestingly enough, what we call a power heating cooling model, which allows us to actually look at the loads in the building, okay? And it actually allows us to begin to, I'm going to very cautiously say, size the heat pump itself. All right, and what we can do is we can take a few numbers. We need the area of the building, the efficiency of the heating system. We need the heating load for the building. And where are you going to come up with the watts per square meter? Little trick in RETScreen. If you know your gas consumption, your electricity, then what you can do is you can work backwards to the heating load in the building. Right? Once you've got that, RETScreen will then determine for you what you can reduce. And what I like about this tool is it allows me to size those hybrid systems where I can, use 60% of the heating capacity that I need and get 90% of the carbon reduction, right? So it allows me to play what if with that sizing. Maybe you want to go all heat pump, but maybe you don't, right? And this RETScreen has the tools to be able to make that assessment. That's a big question today. A lot of people ask that question. If you're dealing with volume controls and fans and pumps, and I use this a lot in our treasure hunts, right? We can relatively quickly go into RETScreen and actually use either the pump model or the fan model and deal with, how we change the speed, how we throttle it. In the fan model, it actually even deals with all the different types of fans you have, right? You might have different types of methodologies for reducing flow, inlet damper, outlet damper, inlet guide vanes, fluid coupling, or adjustable speed drive, right? But it also deals with a forward, backward current, axial fan, and so on. So RETScreen, on the surface of it, seems a bit simple, but if you dig down underneath it, some of these models are actually quite sophisticated. And the pump one, I've actually run that against real retrofits on a number of occasions. And even though it's a relatively simple model, it asks you whether you're throttling lightly or heavily. It actually comes relatively close to the answers in the end. As a first pass, very good tool for estimating the savings, right? And ultimately, you can create sort of visible results from all of these types of measures. The financial side, not the least of which is very important, very capable. This is where RETScreen started. Thanks, Greg, for the amazing financial engine in RETScreen. It actually allows you to do, present value analysis quite effectively. They've incorporated modified internal rate of return, which is a much better measure of the internal rate of return of a project, but tamed down by the discount rate. If you're a financial analysis person, it has the tools for that. It also has them. I don't know if I have this. No, I don't have the screenshot, but it has the risk and sensitivity analysis too, which allows you to permute the different financial input variables and see what's the likely outcome of the project. It could be out here, it could be out here. So by managing certain input parameters, the ones that present the greatest risk to the project, we can then manage the risk of the project too. So it's a tool for little projects. It's a tool for big projects, right? Great tool. All right. Now, on to what I consider to be the thing that I like to really focus on. Not to say that other stuff isn't important. Performance analysis. Performance analysis is kind of, as Scott describes, where we take the data and we analyze the heck out of it. I call this my energy action cycle on the right. So measurement creates data. Lots of organizations have lots of data. They don't use it all. If you can analyze that data, create information, you can drive action with it. You can remeasure that result. And for me, one of the most powerful tools in RETScreen is the ability to generate a QSUM. If you haven't heard of a QSUM before, if you have heard of it, you know what I'm talking about. For those that haven't heard of a QSUM, it's very similar to what a financial person would do. A financial person would give you a budget, right? Or ask you for the budget, but eventually you end up with a budget for financial spending, right? That's like the predicted, essentially, that's like the predicted value in what we predict you will consume. That's your budget. And then you actually move into your spending period and you spend money and you have your actual spend, right? That's like you begin to consume energy after you've created a baseline model. So we've got the actual consumption and the predicted consumption, just like the actual spend and the budgeted spend. Now we take the difference. A financial person will take the variance from budget and tell you, you're over budget, you're under budget. They will take it one step further. They will take the running sum of your variance from budget, right? We'll say this is the year-to-date variance from budget. A QSUM is nothing more than a year-to-date variance between what you expect to occur and what actually occurs. It gives you the trajectory in your energy spending or your energy consumption in that sense. So it sounds like a complicated piece of math, but every financial report has it, right? And through that to-date variance from budget. It's the same arithmetic. How you end up with a budget in a financial report is a little bit different than how you end up with a performance model. But basically, we use regression analysis, statistical analysis to come up with that in RETScreen. So once you have that baseline model, then you can begin to plot these QSUM curves. This was an interest. When we ran this curve to begin with, they had no idea that their performance had improved. Like if a QSUM turns downwards, that means you're using less energy, right? And if it's constantly downwards, a constant slope, nothing's changing. All of a sudden, this thing goes horizontal at some point. When they actually investigated, they figured out that, first of all, it was the economizer they put on the boiler, saving gas, that actually turned it down. But then they realized that they'd serviced the boiler or the economizer about 12 months in. When they put the economizer back into service, they'd forgotten to basically release the valve. There was no water flowing through it for 2 months. And then eventually they got the thing back on track. So you can really see things you could never see otherwise, and people are not aware of, right? You can catch things like the need for, people ask, Michelle, we got to ask a lot. How often do you need the EBCX building, existing building commissioning? Well, if you're tracking with the QSUM, I've often seen the electricity QSUM tail off, which means we're losing savings, right? What can we do? So there's so many things that we can see using this type of tool. Again, RETScreen does this quite nicely, allows us to basically begin with data we all have. We all have. You don't have to go and get new meters. Utility data is all there, right? Electricity and gas, right? We can get weather data, which is how cold, how warm it is, from RETScreen through the NASA interface, right? And on top of that, if we've got occupancy, other variables, we can input those really, really simply. We can develop those statistical models, and then we can drive out those QSUM curves, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's really, once you get good at it, this whole process, including the fact that you may be able to get that electricity data in there from Green Button, this process could take you 5 minutes for a building. Honestly, it is that quick once you get practice at it. There's an example, building that had no idea what they'd done. We asked them, we want to do a little case study in your building for a webinar. Can you send us your data? They'd done a number of things, but they had no idea what they'd saved. So when we ran their QSUM based on the 2014 baseline, right? This was the subsequent years. By 4 years in, these little projects, they could not believe how much they'd spent or saved. They'd done the project because they had to renew things. So guess what? Once they realized what they'd saved, what did they do? They went and did more, right? So it creates momentum to be able to measure and see and make visible all those things that you've done, right? Now, when it comes to ways to get data into RETScreen, lots of them. Green Button, lots of interfaces. I actually use the hydro energy monitor in my house, and I can run it. This is actually some data from my own house, right? So I can pull it in electronically. Every time I open up my RETScreen file in my house, it says, you're connected to a meter out there. Do you want me to pull the data in? go ahead and do it. You can have it in databases, and there are many other interfaces there to other commercially available sources of data as well. So getting data in is getting easier and easier. I mean, I commonly just use a tech or an Excel spreadsheet import. RETScreen is really good at actually parsing those files. They come in different formats, but most of the time I don't have to touch the file. There's only one that I have to touch. It's the one where you get 24 hours across and then days down here. I have to transpose that or reformat it into a column. But other than that, RETScreen does a great job of dealing with many, many different formats. Once I get that data, I can create those demand profiles. This is an hourly profile. I can overlay the dotted line there is the weather. Where do I get the weather data from? Do I have to go and download lots of data from Environment Canada? No, I just click one button in RETScreen. It looks at how much data I have electrically, and it goes and gets the weather data on an hourly basis from the NASA real-time database. It's available for the world over. Doesn't matter where you are on the surface of Ontario, you can get that, or the surface of the Earth for that matter. You can get that data very easily, right? So, and the other way to present that data then is as a, what is this? Heat map, right? Where we can look at, weeks down, right? And weeks across, right? Okay. And then every one of those pixels, I believe this is based on 50-minute data. Every one of those pixels is 50 minutes in the life of that building. So we can see the highest consumption times in red, the lowest consumption times in blue, and everything, right? I actually was looking at one of these little, saw these big clusters months, and it was really red. And I said, what's going on? That's tax season, where the accountant in their building keeps their office open long, right? So yeah, tax season. All right. It says my internet stable. Is the sound still okay out there? Everything good? Okay. It's a little shaky. Is it better now? Hopefully. All right. So it was an opportunity in a debate. I'm going to say that if you've never looked at one of these things before, there's always an opportunity, right? So, and the one thing that we like, two things I like to pick out is high use, those peak demands, but also how well does our peak, right? Sometimes we look at the Qs, look pretty, they're varying all over this. That dotted line is, what's going on in this? Turns out that there was right, where the control, actually it was a multi-stack chiller where we had 2 compressors, and it was slamming on, off, on. Guess what? You can see it. Like 10 minutes after the data, the utility, that's all we use to do the profile. This interesting one in an associated building, in this case, what was happening? This was actually a building, gas and electric heat. Again, we see the children at night, but then during the day, at the end of the day, it's electricity consumption. What happened? Well, what happened was they set the temperatures up in the building, right? It was in the summer, so the temperature started to rise, but then somehow the electrical heating system got this idea that it needed to drive the temperature up to the set point. So they were going into set up in the summer, but the electric heat was kicking in to get to the new set point, which you're supposed to just let the building rise up to. Problem with the heating controls, which were conflicting with the cooling systems. Interesting. That problem existed before in the building, but they'd never actually been able to see it like this. As a result of this, they've recommissioned this building, and now they're going to using FDD to catch this in the future, fault detection and diagnostics. So these types of things can lead to significant changes. Gas consumption, looking at hourly gas consumption, because we can get that today. Looking at the cycling of boilers, right? We can see sometimes, in a mild season down here, we've got almost, in this case, we've got 3 out of 4 boilers firing at the same time. Why do we need 3 out of 4 boilers firing in a day in June, right? Maybe we need to heat the building up, but do we need to heat the building up that quickly? Well, it turns out there were some controls issues with the boilers. Looking at the hourly data, we can see that. All right, we can use the heat maps too on the gas data, right? And this is great when it comes to sizing things like heat pumps too, right? Because we can actually take a look at the actual load curve on the building, and we can see, okay, so the thing, Michelle, you always say is that there's only a very small percentage of the time that you actually need to be at the full heating load of that, or full heating capacity of the building. So here we can see down here, 10% of the time, we're basically is 50% of the capacity. If we drop down here to, let's say, maybe 80% of the capacity, it's only 3% of the time. So we can use this to size or preliminary begin to size the conversion of a heating system. So we're not overspending on that new low carbon source of heat for the building. All right, this is a neat example. This is my last example. So Michelle, I'm going to get you to get ready here. But basically, and this is entirely in the utility perspective space, Scott, right? So this was an LDC that we'd done some work with, and they called me up and they said, we got a customer concerned with a bill increase, high bill complaint, right? And this is about a 4 to 5 meg customer, right? So I said, they said, can you help me? I said, well, can you get me some interval data? Said, yeah, we got permission from the customer. We can send you 2 years worth of interval data. And they actually were able to send me, the customer was willing to send me production data, right? So then I went into RETScreen and began to use it to analyze it. Now, I could do a daily analysis on that using the hourly interval data, bringing it up to a day, but it turned out that the way they report production in the particular plant, that they didn't report it completely on the day ends, but by the end of the week, the production value at the end of the week was a fair representation of how much work had been done, and hence how much energy was going to be used to do that work. Now, it turns out that weather was a much stronger variable than production, but both were needed to get a good statistical model. We actually then plotted the QSUM. I'm actually going to jump to the QSUM and tell the story, and I'll come back to the result. So basically, I was able to plot this QSUM. And we had an online meeting. We had 4 or 5 people from the plant in the meeting, and a couple of people in the plant. And I got involved in September, which is over here at the back end. So they were already on this big mountain, right? But they didn't notice it until probably August. So it took until they'd spend a lot of money before they actually noticed it, because they weren't using like the QSUM. So then the maintenance manager insisted, when they did the transformer maintenance, when they had a shutdown in the month of June, that's when the whole thing started, which may not be, he wasn't completely wrong, but it turns out, I said, well, if you take that transformer maintenance period out of there and you bring that line up, and you realize that the original inception, right, of the increase was back in mid to late April. So we were on the phone, we're debating this, and finally the controller in the plant says, folks, don't you remember what we did in the 3rd week of April? And everybody goes, no, what did we do? He said, we went from 2 shifts to 3 shifts of production because we weren't making our production quotas. But we only used, I said, let me guess, you kind of use 4 hours out of the 8-hour shift and then you shut down after that. He said, yeah, that's about right. They didn't need a full per shift. He said, but most of the equipment just idles. Wrong. Equipment doesn't idle, right? It sits there. It's using energy. It might be idling. It turns out that was going to cost them 40,000 kilowatt hours a week, right? So every week that's 4,000 at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, $4,000 a week. Even at 5 cents a kilowatt hour, that would be $2,000 a week. So that's, when you look at that over a year, if that had continued, that would be somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 worth of electricity. They were ecstatic because they knew what to do. They simply went in there and turned things off, put in place the proper controls, right? So there's a perfect example of working with utility, right, using RETScreen to essentially seeing that waste and getting it fixed as quickly as possible. So, but it would have been a lot quicker had they used the QSUM to detect this than waited until late August. We probably would have detected sometime in June if we were tracking this with the QSUM. So, Michelle, you're on. Okay, actually, I have one. So Michelle and I work together quite a bit. Michelle's going to sort of go through and show you a few examples in RETScreen. He's going to look at sort of tracking performance with production, looking at daily profiles for anomalies, checking the base load in a large commercial. Base load is always good. How good is your building sleep? Looking at the load duration curve, using a feasibility model, and he'll look at, I think, heat recovery, and then the idea of using a portfolio to look at large building stock. So over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll share my screen. You'll have to release it, though.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep.
I'll do that. There we go.
Thank you very much. So hello, everybody. I'm going to go through material that's similar to what Stephen has presented, but I'm going to talk to you about how I help implement RETScreen at 2 clients. One is an large industrial client who had no energy management plan or team, and we did an audit there. We presented RETScreen, and when they saw the results of RETScreen, they said, okay, we need to understand and we need to use that tool. I'll show you also a large commercial client, which had an energy team, and were using actually basically a spreadsheet, like Stephen said. They were also using Portfolio Manager, which is good for benchmarking. But surprisingly enough, they were not going any further than that in their, I'd say, energy management analytics. And then again, we prepared RETScreen, and those guys have multiple buildings. And we showed them for their 2 largest facility. And then the internal team took over and started preparing RETScreen files for all of their facilities. So I'll start with the industrial case. So as Stephen said, you can always locate your building wherever you want. So this building, it's easy enough. You just click on the little Earth globe here, and it will provide you a map of the Earth. You can locate your building wherever it is. It is actually quite important to locate it in the proper location, because the weather data that you're going to import automatically from the NASA website will be for the location where that building is located. So it is quite important to have it fairly precisely where it's located. And I know there's a few, sometimes there's a few tricks about that, Stephen, that you mentioned, if there's a body of water, if there's a microclimate, but typically you just, put it exactly where it is. So in this case, it was in the Toronto area. And so the first thing we do, and let's say all of the clients I work with that started using RETScreen, they start with performance. So I'm going to look at performance, then I'm going to go back to feasibility, because really they get their feet wet, if I can say, with the performance module. So in the performance module, the first thing you have to do is obviously, sorry, I clicked the wrong one here. You have to define your meters, and it's very easy. You just go in here, define a consumption meter for the meters that you already have. In this case, I had an electricity meter and I had a natural gas meter. Obviously, there's other things that can be quite relevant, both for commercial and industrial. Water consumption, very important. Obviously, in industrial, production level, the example that Stephen has showed. So you get all that information, you easily import it into those meters. The one thing I'm going to say that I really have to insist on clients, make sure you will tag any estimated reading, because later on we're going to do analytics. And analytics on estimated readings is not truly valid. So you need to know which readings are estimated and which readings are real. And that actually will sometimes teach clients that estimated readings are good for, budgetary purposes, to be able to pay the gas company, because usually it's gas, sometimes water, that's estimated. So that's one, I'd say, heads up that you need to have. In this case, we also had interval data, both at the 5-minute and 15-minute interval. Even if you have hourly, it's fine. It is actually very powerful to be able to analyze the hourly or sub-hourly profile.
Well, Michelle, actually, you should mention that there's actually a neat filter which allows you to deal with those estimated reads. It rolls all the estimated reads up into actuals for you.
Actual readings. So, and like I said, it's important that and the other thing that's really important is to have the proper reading dates. So again, client's perspective is really to teach them, enter the real dates, not the month you received the bill, enter if they're estimated, and please, if possible, enter the kW, the power, and if you have it, the kVA, the apparent power, and that will provide you a really strong basis for your performance analysis with RETScreen. So once you've done that, you've got all your data in there, you can go into the analytics and you can define, like Stephen showed you, a number of different graphs that can help an energy team have a look at their profile. The one that I always insist that they learn to use is the time series, where you have your interval data and you can go and look at how is my building behaving hour by hour. In this case, it's 5 minutes by 5 minutes. And you will detect almost all the time going through that some anomalies, and sometimes it's the impact of changes in your plant. In this case, I've saved 2 profile because it's easy to save, let's say, favorite profile. They made a change to the production facility. which they thought had an impact on demand because, you know, the cost was, but then they looked at the hourly profile and they could see that they usually were around 3,000 kilowatt demand. And once they made the change to their production, well, that actually jumped up to about 3,700 kilowatt between, you know, it was 3,500, 3,700 kilowatts. So it does help put numbers beside, and I'm not going into the really detailed analytics because again, it's the baby steps. When you're new into RETScreen, a new client gets into it, you really have to get the handle on how to use it fairly quickly. Those guys are busy. They're industrial people. Their primary goal is production. It's really, they sometimes completely forget about energy. As long as I produce, that's good. So you want something that will be quick. And for looking at profiles, RETScreen is really quick. You can go through a year in basically like 5 minutes. You just go here and you go week by week. And it doesn't take long to notice. Sometimes it's a data gap like you just saw, but you will be able, once you know how to read those graphs, to see. There's obviously the low duration curve. And that one you have to explain to the client before you leave them alone with RETScreen. And in this case, it will show you that this plant uses 500 kilowatt of power for about 20 hours in the year. So, and that's I'm not going to go into the details of Class A and Class B electricity customers. We have an expert here with Scott on that. But if they can eliminate 20 hours that represent 500 kilowatt, that's a huge amount of savings that they could do to improve their production, reduce their greenhouse gas. So again, the low duration curve can be a good diagnostic tool to identify opportunities. So just example of what I'd say the basic client that starts with RETScreen needs to learn. And then obviously, very importantly, is how to produce your regression. And the regression will tell you how your building behaves or your consumption behaves with regard to your independent variable, production, weather. Sometimes people tell me occupancy for an office building, and I tell them, how do you measure it? If you cannot measure it reliably, it is not a reliable factor to put in your regression. So it's not it's one thing to know that it may impact it. It's the other thing to know that you have to measure it on a similar scale, actually, as your energy consumption data. So I always tell that to the client. They come with me, oh, this is going to influence my consumption. Well, do you measure it? If you don't measure it, you cannot put it into regression. In this case, the client was convinced that production was the primary driver of its gas usage. So I showed him how to do a regression. And you see here, there's one with heating degree days and production. Again, the client was convinced that those were the primary driver. So we do a regression. Again, it's quite easy. You go up there, it says established baseline. You can produce a regression. Now, without going into the math, I'm a bit of a technical nerd, but I'm going to say the one thing you have to look at when you do a regression is the R squared. Scott mentioned it. You typically want something higher than 0.75, 0.8. You see that this R squared is very low. And if I would go into the details, I can also see that I've got what's called a T ratio that is not very good. It's just 1.5. You want something above 2.2. So to the client dismay, his production was not correlating very well with consumption. So we sat down and we said, why? And it actually goes down to what Steven said, idling losses. They had a lot of losses that they did not realize had such an impact on their consumption. So just going through establishing the baseline, looking at the low duration curve, at the monthly profiles, they started already hitting some of their opportunities. And they started looking around if they found a number of steam losses. And those steam losses, they're there all the time. They are not related to production. So that kind of explained their fairly poor R squared. Show you what kind of and even though the regression was not very good, it still gives you, and actually I could do a different type of regression, not going to go in details, gives you a Q sum. So it shows that for a period of time, the production was, kind of humming along there. It's my baseline. And then there's this point where it turns down significantly. And again, the client said, oh, I know what happened. It's when we had a boiler go down, and we had to keep production going with only 3 boilers instead of 4. So we kind of rearranged all of our production. We better scheduled everything. And they saved 1.5 million cubic meter of gas. That's like $300,000. They did not invest anything. They just changed the way they were producing. Unfortunately, as soon as the boiler came back online, they went back to their old habit. They had never realized, and you could say it's easy, they could look at the gas bills, but the accountant may pay the gas bills, the plant manager may not look at it. But now that he knows that the QSUM can give him that kind of information, obviously they not only did they stop saving at this point when the boiler came back, but they started using more. That was a shock to everybody. So it's another example of you implement it in a plant, could be a commercial building, you will actually start getting people to be more aware of the results of their actions. And I know I'm running out of time there, so
you got 5 minutes.
5 minutes. I'll just show you for the feasibility. The guys in the plant, they did not have time yet and didn't have the knowledge to build a whole plant in RETScreen, but they did use RETScreen in the feasibility module to get steam losses. They had a lot of losses. So they say, you know what, we're not going to build a whole plant in RETScreen, but we want to know how much does that 2 millimeter hole is actually in the gasket there. That's 2 millimeter. How much do we waste? 75,000 kilowatt hour equivalent. And that is not the energy usage. That's the load associated with that loss.
Michelle, can you do something? Because millimeter, but can you make that inches? Can you change the units there? Because you can do this automatically in RETScreen, right?
Yes.
So inches, that is, what is that? That's like, it's less than 1/8 of an inch. It's like a 1/16 of an inch.
Yeah. So it was tiny. So again, they use RETScreen because they were starting. Eventually, the plant engineer says, if I have time, I want to build my whole plant in there. But they started with getting that kind of information. So you can use it piecemeal. Go ahead, Stephen.
What's that worth? Click to the include screen, and what's that? I always like to tell people, a 1/16 of an inch leak is worth $4,000, over $4,000.
Yes, so it was quite, and that's one leak. And I can tell you that plant had multiple leaks. And again, you could say they don't need RETScreen to know that they have leaks, but they needed RETScreen to raise the awareness and put numbers beside that. And obviously, they can then put also greenhouse gas numbers. But very quickly, I'm just going to show you the commercial facility, because it's something that obviously has similar impact. They started with the performance module. So same thing, they entered all of their information. And the one thing that I tried to teach them was just, obviously, we have our QSUM, we have the shape of the QSUM. I tried to teach them what the shape of a QSUM means. When you have a QSUM that goes straight down, that means you got a constant saving month after month. In this case, you see it has kind of this stepwise profile. That means it's a seasonal change. So I tried to teach them, when you see that in your QSUM, your savings happen either on a cooling system or a heating system. In this case, it's cubic meter of gas, so it's a heating system. You don't save in the summer if the boilers are turned off. So that's why you have to understand the shape of your QSUM. So just another example. And what I wanted to show you is what Stephen said is the base load. They were very doubtful. I actually did an audit there, and I told them, what your base load is, it's like 80% of your consumption. It's in the building day and night. And they were doubtful. I said, let's go in RETScreen. We import their utility data, and you look, the base load is always around 1,700 kilowatt. It never goes below that. So the daytime usage was just those little daytime bumps, which accounted for very little. So once the energy manager saw that, they started basically a treasure hunt for base load consumption, base load equipment that could be turned off. And yesterday, Stephen, we talked about that. You save 1 kilowatt hour of base load, that can amount to not only a lot of kilowatt hour, but also demand savings. In this case, it's a Class A customer, can also be global adjustment savings. So it's because you reduce the entire building. The last thing I want to show you, and then I'm going to pass it on to Amir. The client had the same approach. They started with the performance module. They got really comfortable in there. They started understanding the QSUM, looking at that. And then the building's really large. So say they did not, put the entire building in there, but they had a few measures that were, proposed to them. Some of them were for comfort purposes, such as adding a window film on the south and west facing windows. They say, what will be the energy impact of putting a window film? So we don't have to do the whole building. That's the nice thing about RETScreen. It's modular. So they just defined the windows. The windows are here. So you've got the U value and the solar heat gain coefficient. They were not changing windows. They were putting a shading film. It was not a low-E shading film. It was just a shading film. So what they were doing is reducing the solar heat gain coefficient. And if I go down at the bottom, RETScreen will tell you the heating impact and the cooling impact. And again, very often people tend to neglect the heating impact of window film, but this tool allows you to see that, hey, we put the window film, our heating is going to go up by 22,000 kilowatt hour. We will save 40,000 kilowatt hour, and that's not electricity saving, that's a load savings. Then if I go into the include measure, it will tell you how much is going to divide it by the COP of the chiller, is going to divide it by the efficiency of the boiler. So it tells them information that's really useful in their decision-making approach. And the last one was same thing for heat recovery. And sorry, Amir, I don't want to take too much. Let's say they wanted to put a heat recovery device on their makeup air unit. Very easy, modular approach. You define makeup air units 100% outside there, 234,000 equivalent kilowatt hour of load savings. So maybe 270,000 kilowatt hour equivalent of actual cubic meter of gas. So again, using RETScreen as, I'd say, a first step before even building the whole building in the feasibility module, it's able to provide them quick answers to their device. I had another example for what's called a cold deck system, but I don't think I'll have time for that, Stephen, so I'll pass it on to Amir.
If anybody wants to do heat recovery in a cold deck system, just send email.
Just talk to me.
And he'll show you how to do it. We're going to have webinars on.
You got to be very careful about cold deck systems. Yeah. You have a special modeling approach in RETScreen, because otherwise you will fool yourself in getting large savings. Cold deck systems are your VAV systems mostly. So yeah, there's a special way of doing that in RETScreen.
We'll be doing a webinar which will star Michelle showing us how to use RETScreen to do some maybe little not normal things in terms of HVAC. So he's got some neat tricks. Okay, you're going to need to release the screen there for me. There we go. Great. Okay, screen 2, and I need to give Amir some control here. So there, Amir should have control. All good. Go for it.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephen. Hello, everyone. Happy to be part of this presentation and share a service provider perspective. Michelle and Stephen both greatly covered the importance of looking at the QSUM and performance analysis, which is exactly what we do and what we offer on a monthly basis and weekly basis in our meeting with the operation team. And so what I'm going to talk today is touch on measurement verification importance again, and then talk about why we chose to work with RETScreen. Okay, perfect. So energy efficiency is the absence of energy. So we cannot measure energy efficiency directly. So we should have a reliable, transparent, and consistent conservative tool in order to measure energy efficiency. And what we use is International Protocol for Measurement and Verification that is published by EVO. So this is our basic and cornerstone for everything we do as energy service provider. And whether we do energy audit, we do EBCX, or we do incentives program for utilities and or retrofit or everything else, we have to use a measurement verification to be able to verify the savings. And so this is what we need to do. And there are lots of tools out there that basically can do measurement verification or performance analysis. But what we found differently in RETScreen was we tried to categorize into two main category here. The number one was the feature, MMV feature, basically not only adheres to IP-MVP protocol, it also meets the principle of IP-MVP, where we need to have a model to be consistent, conservative, and transparent, relevant, and etc. The link is there, and so we found that this is greatly meet our expectation. The second thing that we found, and we pleasantly surprised by our RETScreen team, they were very proactive in dealing with the industry demand and need. And if I give you an example, that was at the time that pandemic hit. So all measurement verification plans and QSIM analysis kind of distorted by having a lot of low occupancy, KWH or consumption in the building. And we were fortunate that EVO came around and they published a guideline for non-routine event and non-routine adjustment. And fortunately, RETScreen was one of the early adopters. So they not only adopted this tool, which made it available for the RETScreen new version, they also reached out to us because at that time they knew that we were working with the utilities and we were working on incentive programs. So we implemented that in certain buildings. So they knew that we have actual data. So they wanted to reach out to us and also obtain the data, real data, and feed it into the RETScreen, which I think is great credit that I can give to the RETScreen. Whenever you have a tool, you are not alone. As Michelle pointed earlier, that there are lots of videos and webinars and other things that you can basically use and basically get answer for your response. The other thing, just touching on the ongoing support we get from RETScreen team is if we come across a pickup that is not in a video or something very unique, either myself or my colleague will reach out to the RETScreen support team. And we 99% of the time get on the same day response, someone is trying to help us. And they also would like to even, if we have a problem or hiccup in our file, they would like to even get the file and fix the issue. This is something that I didn't see in any other MMV tools out there to support you to that end, to help you to resolve your issues. And the next thing, now that we are talking on a triangle of service providers, client, and utilities, and we have utilities among the audiences, is the collaboration. We believe that RETScreen is a collaboration tool in that in our team, when we work on a RETScreen, we can have different colleagues working on the same file, in different location. Now after pandemic, we work remotely, so they are working in their home office. So we can work at the same time at the same file and then share the results. And once we work on the file, then we bring to our client's attention, similar to the way that Michelle did. And we found that it is more impactful, instead of taking a screenshot and putting in a presentation, putting up the RETScreen, because that lively shows the data and people can better engage and also educate. And as Michelle and Stephen pointed, the purpose of doing this is putting things into numbers. So people might not have a good sense about KWH increase, but if you translate it into the dollar value, and then operators or operation team, which mostly work with, are more interested in understanding and helping and taking the matter to the next step. And the last, again, I touched on the utilities. What we found differently about RETScreen was, at the time, again, there was a lot of tool that we could use for measurement verification, but we found that utilities are getting comfortable working with RETScreen. So we'd send them a RETScreen file, and they would send to the reviewer. So everyone knew RETScreen is the reliable and transparent tool, and they would accept us working on MMV in the RETScreen. So that was the unique feature that we had the fortunate of using the RETScreen. Here's, as I mentioned, that we have a feature on the MMV part, or performance analysis, in RETScreen that would allow us to do non-routine events and non-routine adjustment. And that was after pandemic. We live in a very dynamic world these days. So a pandemic basically taught us that there are lots of things that can change, which probably was not as significant before. So this is an example of a building that we had change in occupancy, EV charges, and lighting retrofit that we needed to subtract for that particular program. But after pandemic hit, basically now we had a lot of non-routine events that being so impactful that we needed to consider in our performance analysis. So now RETScreen makes it available conveniently. So if you have any non-routine event, which is very, very plausible these days for a building to have, either adding solar panels or renewables or EV chargers or other things. So you can easily and conveniently work with RETScreen to accommodate non-routine event and non-routine adjustment. Just one example about that. So if I go to next page, yeah. This is an example of what we found out in a property when we were working with their steam monthly bill. We found out that the steam consumption going up, and the magnitude of it was getting higher and higher toward the end of 2023. So this is the point when we put the numbers or monetize the numbers, then everyone got curious to find out what would be the root cause. So we reached out to the utility, local utility, and they were great enough to supply the hourly data. So what we are seeing here is the monthly data where we are seeing increase in steam consumption for a commercial office building. And when we reach out to the utilities, we got this. And so we were able to create a lot more granular model where we could distinguish between weekdays and weekend. This is very important because when we had the lump sum number as a monthly consumption, we couldn't distinguish where the increase is coming from, if it's coming from weekdays or weekend or what kind of increase we have. So we were able to create a solid baseline with the R-square of 0.93, whereas when we were working on the monthly, R-square was around 1.8. So now, this time around, we can better quantify the impact and the nature of the changes and how much basically changes can occur and cause increase. So as you see here, we find out that increase is having winter nature. So where we are having, I don't know if everyone see my cursor. So where we are having a steep increase or a huge increase here is the winter, and we have also steady increase in summer consumption. Just as an example, we are currently working on this project to get to the bottom of it, but we look at in a different perspective. For summer consumption, when we look at the hourly consumption, this time on a heat map on RETScreen, on the left side, we saw 2019, 100% occupancy, and steam is only used for tap water, domestic hot water. So building had 4,000 people occupants, and the consumption rarely goes above 380, 360. But on the right side, when the building is having 20% occupancy only, the consumption, even after business hours, is around 340, 350. So that would tell us that something took place in a nature that is ongoing and is causing the total building steam use going up, even when no one is in the building. So that is coming from waste either somewhere or problem that is, again, having ongoing nature. So this is a kind of top-down approach that we take the data, which is raw, and convert it into information and useful basically presentation in order to take it to the next step, which starts from bottom-up approach, where we go in a property, look at the system, look at the function, and by knowing this kind of knowledge that we got and obtained from the utility analysis, now we can build up and start doing functional tests in order to get to the bottom of it and fix the issues. I tried to just wrap it in the time that I had. Sorry if I went very fast, but basically that was it.
I think we've all gone fast, but no, that was wonderful. You're right on the nose. Thank you, Amir. And I like what you've said here in terms of actually the idea about, going to change things over here. You educating, and Michelle, you said the same thing, and Scott, educating the customer at the same time as you're consulting with the customer, right? And somebody once said to me years ago that they went to work with a customer. This was a consulting firm, and I'd worked with them before in some training. They'd been through some workshops, and they said, the first thing he said is, I've never seen somebody that can squeeze as much information from so little data as possible. And that's what we're talking about here, taking data, whatever we can get our hands on, and squeezing as much information, which drives us towards the opportunities, right? At the same time as educating that customer, right? Because the educated customer is the one that's going to take the next step, right? If they don't understand, they're not on board, they don't get it, then they're going to be hesitant to take a step. So it creates momentum as well. So I think you've done a great job of talking about how you've done that, Michelle. The same thing from your point of view. I was really impressed by those things. Okay, so just to wrap this one up, you've got an all-in-one tool. All of these things could be done in one tool, right? I mean, you don't have to go and have different things everywhere, as you pointed out quite eloquently there, Amir. It's also a collaboration tool, right? So, and you can control what things people change as well. So I'm just going to run through very quickly why use RETScreen. Simplification, right? And I think it will. The consulting firm I worked with did found that it made their job easier, right? Standardization, because then you were not using different numbers in different places, right? We're using standardized value, looking at, say, emission factors there. Persuasion. There's lots of great, I mean, I could probably fill 50 slides with some of the persuasive graphics. We've seen a number of those, but even these progress charts that are part of the dashboard of reporting, you can customize and create those, link them back to data in RETScreen. Very powerful tools. Interoperability, working with different sources, right? I did a webinar for healthcare a little while ago. We had one of the organizations that Michelle and I work with, Service New Brunswick, from the hospital. We had Kate Butler talking about how they do Portfolio Manager for all their buildings, and then they take the data from Portfolio Manager into RETScreen to do the granular analysis. They can see things the Portfolio Manager can't see. They're using the tools hand in hand, interoperability, and then all the connection, green button, and everything else that you can get data in there as well. So you're going to get a chance to give it a test drive if you haven't already got it. I'm going to encourage everybody to give it a go. I think somewhere there's probably our email addresses attached to the slide. I always say, please, as you're doing this, or even if you're continuing to use RETScreen, I'm sure there's lots of people out there we'd love to help you, right? If you've got a question, please let us know, something that any one of us talked about you'd like to try, please reach out. We're not going to ask you to hire us. It's just really that you can sort of get some value out of what we're doing here and maybe take those few steps forward. That's our goal in all this, is to get you moving forward, and with the support of RETScreen, quite kindly acknowledged as well. So Scott, I'm going to pass it back to you.
All right. Thanks very much, Stephen. Once again, I've really enjoyed this workshop. I'm always amazed, and bringing you, Michelle, Amir together and start looking at the data, I get excited. And I hope maybe not as excited as watching The Matrix, but second best. The way that we can look at it, this what originally was just numbers flowing off a chart, and being able to turn that around to actually tell the story on what's happening. And I noticed that all three of you mentioned the importance of getting that information across. And it's not about one person. We talk about a customer, but that customer is made up of a manager, an operations supervisor, an operator. And it's a matter of taking that data and moving that data around so that we can answer that individual's question, whether it's about economics, whether it's about comfort, whether it's about cost, whether it's about savings, whether it's about GHG. Everybody is looking at wanting to better understand the situation. And Stephen, I think you said it very well. If you raise that comfort level, that people can believe in what you're doing, they'll want to make that next step. And that's what we're all about. So a great presentation. I thank you very much for putting it together and sharing all your insights. Totally agree that RETScreen is a powerful tool, and I think you did a great job of summarizing what it is. It really helps make everything so much more visible, and the analytical capability has been terrific. So it's
Scott, I got an example here right away. Greg Leng's on the line here. He posted in the questions here is there's a new weekend tool, which I've just become aware of, not now, but a little while ago, in the filter menu, which you can use to filter your data. So if you've got daily data or hourly data, you can filter it according to weekends and weekdays, because obviously you may need to do that. Great little tool, Greg. I know a lot of people have requested that, so there's a great example of how RETScreen has responded. Sorry to jump in there, but yeah, We'll give you some feedback on that tool. Let others out there, if you haven't used it, use the tool before, have the ability to separate weekdays and weekends in your performance data. Sorry, Scott, back to you.
No, that's great. I'm glad you jumped in, Stephen. We want to make this as interactive as possible. We only have about 6 minutes left. I don't have control of the screen, Stephen. Do you mind just going to the next slide?
Will you say please? No.
Please, sorry. Yeah, sorry, that's the wrap up. So there's our contact information. Alex, I'm going to turn it over to you to see if there's any other questions that people have.
Hey guys, thank you so much for that presentation. That was awesome. No other questions at the time, but we do have a couple minutes if you guys want to give some final thoughts, something you want to leave the people with here.
Well, one thing, go ahead, Scott.
Well, I was just looking at the measurement of verification, and that to me was a aha moment. We had struggled in 2020 where we saw the occupancy drop, commercial building 80%, 90%, and yet we knew that we could also preserve the energy efficiency measures because they were implemented in 2017, 18, 19, and some were even implemented in 2020. So it was so frustrating trying to know that there was savings there, but not be able to articulate what the difference was between an energy efficiency saving and a occupancy reduction. And this was in commercial buildings. But really, thanks to Amir's efforts and the EVO's guidelines and RETScreen support, we were able to put together a convincing case that we could use the guidelines and demonstrate the non-routine event, non-routine adjustment, and quantify the energy efficiency savings to the point that not only Toronto Hydro accepted it, but the ISO has accepted it, and they are now using the same methodology. So having RETScreen adopt that and make it that much more easy that was a real aha moment for me. And I think it really typifies the value of the utility, working with the customer and the service provider. So it's a trilogy of win-win-win. Sorry, Stephen, you wanted to say something.
No, I just want to reinforce the fact that sort of reinforces what Michelle and Mira are saying about the education piece. But every time we do any kind of training event, we want to use RETScreen live. I mean, today I didn't use it live. This is kind of an unusual one for me just because of the timing, but we did have Michelle, I think he did some great live demonstrations, but using it live allows the people that wouldn't otherwise be able to get their hands on it. So this isn't just for people that use it, right? Because we did a session yesterday, Michelle and I, and an operator would ask a question. We would go in there and do something. So through our hands and through the data, the operator was able to interact with their building in that sense. So I think that it's not just a consultant's tool; it's also an educator's tool in that sense, right? And think about how people can benefit from it, even if they're not going to have their hands on it. You are the conduit. You can be the conduit for your customers, to them benefiting. So, so I've got Greg has a question. I've heard that some staffing utilities say that low R2 values can be acceptable in some situations. Do you have recommendation practices around the statistics for regressions? Well, I always say that it's not just R squared, Greg, that you use when you do a performance model. There's 3 statistics, just going to get statistical in everybody here. There's the R squared value, which tells you how much of the variation you're describing. There's the T ratio, which Michelle referred to. That tells you whether the variable deserves to be in the equation or not. That is it statistically or significant? And then the final one that a lot of people talk about is the CVRMSE, the coefficient of variation of root mean square error. It tells you the noise, the uncertainty in your data. All of those have to be within range. So the R squared alone, definitely a low R squared value can be acceptable. What it says is you're missing a variable though. You can have high T ratio and an acceptable, very acceptable CVRMSE, but if you've got a low R squared, it says you're missing a variable. So there are cases where it might be acceptable. If I'm looking at a complete data set, right, like 3 years of data, I'm going to expect where there's changes in the data, right? Those changes are like a variable, right, that I'm not accounting for. But if I focus in on a baseline period, right, where there's no changes, I can increase that R squared value. I got to stay within the rules of 12 points, the number of points. So that's a tough question to answer in a minute or two.
Yeah.
But I think the idea is to look at all the things, but the low R-squared value is telling you that you're probably missing a variable or you have changes in your baseline. Michelle?
And Stephen, the context is important.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do that for IPMVP purposes, and if it's for savings verification, you may be bound to some R-squared value imposed by the standard. When it's for in-house purposes where you don't have legal liability, the answer may be different. So you got to see what context you're dealing with.
And I can
sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say I can let you go, Scott, but I can generate a regression in the Q-sum from a low R-squared value. I can see changes in the Q-sum. So if I want to just know where the changes take place and be able to parse my data, that's entirely acceptable to have that low R-squared value. It's a tool. That could be an interesting webinar is how to use those statistical parameters in concert with one another in different contexts. There's an idea, Greg. Scott, over to you.
Well, I just wanted to throw the question upside down. We discovered, I think it was really Amir, discovered that a very high R-squared does not necessarily mean efficient operation.
No,
and this resulted with, and I think some people miss that point, that especially with natural gas and steam, a high R-square shows a very high correlation to outside weather, for example. But are you using that? Are you heating the building when the building doesn't need to be heated, simply put? So I know we're running out of time, so I won't elaborate on it, but I think that would be a really good session as well. A lot more to learn. Thank you.
The definition of R-squared is simply how much of the variation that you observe are you explaining with your model. That doesn't speak anything to efficiency. You're entirely correct.
Exactly.
Yep.
Well, that was awesome, guys. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have reached our time for today. Just before I go into our closing remarks, I wanted to once again extend a thank you to Scott, Stephen, Michael, Michelle, and Amir for being here today and giving that amazing presentation. Also wanted to extend a big thank you to our sponsor, RETScreen. Last but not least, I just wanted to thank you, the audience, for your questions and participation today. Thank you, everyone. Have a great and safe day.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.